Tonight, HS2, the most expensive railway in the world.
We know the budget doesn't stack up, so what does it take to scrap this white elephant?
For years, politicians swore it was on time, on budget.
It is really a zombie railway. Parliament was misled from the very beginning.
£7 billion already spent. Now ministers consider scrapping it altogether.
We're going to become the laughingstock of the world, where we're setting out on these things and then can't finish them.
Homes demolished, land cleared, the dead exhumed. But are our high-speed hopes about to hit the buffers?
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. For a decade now, billions of our taxes have poured into HS2, the new high-speed railway linking London, Birmingham and the north of England. ITV understands that any day now a report will be handed to ministers suggesting major changes. The review could even say we scrap the whole thing. With £7 billion already spent, how did we get here? John Ray asks, is this the death of the high-speed express?
Not since the bomb damage of World War II has Britain cleared so much land. This vast area of Euston in central London is just one of 62 sites being flattened in preparation for 250-mile-an-hour trains that would slice half an hour off trips to Birmingham and around an hour off those to Manchester, Leeds and beyond. 10 years into HS2 and billions of pounds spent, and yet the government has commissioned a review which might cancel all this. It's possible that this site might never see a train. While the bulldozers carry on, that review team argue whether to build, shorten or axe the entire thing.
I don't comment while it's ongoing, do I?
Could we really have spent more than £7 billion on something that might now be scrapped? The new Transport Secretary thinks we could.
Just because you spent a lot of money on something should not mean that you just carry on ploughing more and more money into it.
The £7 billion already spent is enough to build 15 city-size NHS hospitals. In London, they've even had to raise the dead. 50,000 were buried in this 170-year-old graveyard. The scale of the site is enormous. So fast forward to the end of the next decade, where are we standing?
Well, we're stood just above where Platform 1 of the High Speed 2 station will be. There'll be 11 high-speed platforms in total, each train carrying over 1,000 people.
If it happens.
It will happen, I'm sure of it.
But as the site manager imagines the finished project, many, like publican Craig Douglas, have lost homes and businesses to HS2.
I used to run the pub that's now the hole in the ground, opposite where we're standing at the moment.
This was once his Brie Louise pub, demolished this summer.
There'll be a few of my neighbours who'll see this and they'll burst into tears, I'll tell you.
If HS2 is scrapped, locals and London's Camden Council fear the land they were forced to hand over will be sold to the highest bidder.
And this will be very expensive high-rise office blocks and luxury housing.
HS2 sold the project to Parliament at £56 billion. But last month, they admitted it will now cost up to £78 billion, with completion running 5 years late.
Parliament was misled from the very beginning.
Long-time HS2 critic Simon Jenkins says the review must now kill off the project.
It is really a zombie railway. I'd love to see the review come clean and say, look, this was a mistake. We do need more money to be spent on the railway, and we need it to be spent on the commuter railway in the north, on the railway to the west, on upgrading and improving the signalling on the existing main lines. That's where I'd like to see the money spent. If they announced that at the same time as they killed off HS2, I think everyone would cheer.
The work is much further advanced than I thought it was going to be.
For the former Transport Secretary, who originated HS2, it seems madness to kill it now.
We will, of course, be the laughingstock of the world if, having spent £7 billion in the middle of delivering one of the biggest infrastructure projects in the world, if we don't do HS2, we're going to have to spend, I would estimate, an equivalent sum over a longer period in upgrading the existing Victorian railway lines, for which we will get only a fraction of the benefits. Do you know, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, China, Japan, they can't all be wrong. They have all built, in the last 50 years, high-speed lines between their major cities, and it's high time we did the same.
So do we need HS2? For decades now, Britain has rather embarrassingly imported trains, like this 160-mile-an-hour Italian Pendolino. But we barely let them go over 100 miles an hour because they'd catch up slower trains.
Taking those long-distance trains off and putting them on HS2, segregating the high-speed services, as we call it, you free up lots of space on the existing railway for more local services, more commuter trains, more freight, of course, so getting rid of those HGVs, all that good stuff.
Because of all the time, trouble and money that goes into making a model railway, modelers think long and hard before they lay a single track. So you would be forgiven for thinking they might have a few tips for HS2. Per mile, HS2 has become the most expensive railway in the world. They admit the costings were unrealistic for a densely populated country, nor had they fully checked the terrain they planned to dig through. MPs are bewildered.
Frankly, some of that should have been predictable. And so the idea that there's suddenly a surprise now is a concern, because if you're going to suddenly add a tunnel in under the Chilterns, well, because there's a decision to do that, there's going to be a cost to that. It's a brave Secretary of State who suddenly comes out one day and says, oops, we got it wrong by £10 billion. But actually, that's honesty, isn't it?
3 years ago, Meg Hillier's committee warned HS2 was billions over budget, but right up to this summer, ministers told Parliament nothing was wrong.
There is only one budget for HS2, and it is £55.7 billion.
But the man who would shortly become Prime Minister didn't believe a word of it.
And I want to see whether the cash, which is huge, 100 billion, should be better prioritised in the north of the country.
Thank you.
On entering Downing Street, Boris Johnson ordered a go or no-go review.
I don't think there's any future in keeping things quiet about HS2. Why don't we just get it all out there?
Within days, HS2 confessed they could not build the line for £56 billion. They'd need another £20 billion. No one has been sacked or forced to resign.
3 chairmen of HS2 just in the last year. This is not a good way to manage an infrastructure project.
The question is, who's in charge? And we often ask this at committee, and I call it public accounts tennis, because you look at the panel, you say, who's in charge of this? And they do this to each other.
I was not there from the outside.
There are issues about when people are highly paid, they make mistakes, and then they walk away.
For many on the path of the line, there's no walking away. 3 years ago, we met Becky, just weeks after moving into her brand new home on the Shimmer estate in Mexborough, South Yorkshire. She got a letter.
It is likely that the government would need to acquire some or all of your land or property in order to construct the railway.
HS2 was cutting right across the brand new estate. Homeowners rallied.
The whole HS2 project itself doesn't stack up.
Since you were last here, we had a lot of big meetings to start with initially, but then as it's taken a toll on people's health and their family lives, they've moved away. So the estate's become quite a ghost town, really. In a way, it just feels like we can't beat them.
With no new buyers, local politicians fear the estate running down.
Do you want to know what it's like living with HS2 in the community? These are people living in family homes. This is blight, unfinished property. It's such a sad situation for all the families. Now, the truth is coming out. The review is underway. We know they've been lying all along. They're lying about the costs. They're lying about the benefits of the whole scheme. It's time to scrap the white elephant.
More than 70 families here have taken HS2's offer of original market value plus 10% and left. The estate was so new, some homes weren't finished. Others have never been lived in.
When the neighbours leave, it's sad. Friends are thinking about moving, and I can't blame them, but I'm just stubborn, so I will be staying for as long as I can.
So we've got a review that's now potentially finishing in autumn.
As long as they make their mind up, and we can move on with this life.
Yeah, definitely.
Buying up land for 345 miles of railway through modern Britain was never going to be easy. I'm about to meet someone who was responsible for doing just that. Doug Thornton was at director level inside HS2 and claims he was asked to hide some of the real costs.
My role at HS2 was to buy all the land on the HS2 route that would enable the railway to be built between London and Birmingham and points north.
In 2016, Parliament was due to approve the project's budget. Doug claims HS2 didn't want MPs to know parts of the budget weren't adding up.
So when you started to look at the books, you discovered that the money set aside to buy land, to buy property, was nowhere near enough. What examples do you remember?
Well, things like a block of flats in Camden with a couple of £100 against it for the entire block of flats. That's phenomenal. I mean, you can't buy a replacement front door for that, never mind a block of flats. A school for several £100s. If you think of the price of a school, how much does it cost to replace a secondary school? Tens of millions of pounds? Certainly not a few £100s. So the data that we were finding was really very, very distinct and concerning.
So what are we talking about here? Millions of pounds?
No, billions of pounds. Billions of pounds on land alone. I didn't intend to be a whistleblower at any point in my career, but ultimately I have got an obligation to step forward in the public interest and to talk about this. There was something seriously and fundamentally not right with the way that HS2 was advancing its business case through Parliament.
So what did you do instead?
I walked away, I called out a grievance, and I found myself sacked within 11 minutes.
HS2 insists Doug was never tasked to make such detailed cost estimates. An independent review found nothing untoward and the cost estimates reasonable. Even the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, dismissed Doug as carrying out his own desktop exercise. Grayling resigned before the £20 billion overspend became public.
So you were right. The Transport Secretary was hopelessly wrong.
It kind of looks that way. New chairman has said, I'm terribly sorry, it's actually £18 billion. So, did they have a handle on it? It doesn't look like it.
Chris Grayling told us he only became aware of cost pressures last year. He asked HS2 to investigate. That report did not reach ministers until he'd left the department.
This is public money. This isn't just, monopoly money from community chest. We're talking 20 to 30 billion pounds of a black hole here. So if the price that I've paid is high, then it's nothing compared to the price that's being paid by homeowners, families, communities, business owners, landowners across the length of this route, whose lives are being severely inconvenienced by High Speed 2.
MPs voted overwhelmingly for HS2 by 10 to 1. But the review now seems to have reignited opposition.
Sensible would be felling no ancient woodlands in advance of that review at all. We believe that HS2 is going to be enormously damaging to our environment and threatening to our climate as well.
Even HS2's green credentials, electric trains, planting new trees and getting cars off the road, struggle to be heard.
I have been walking the route of HS2. This is day 30.
Joe Rukin thinks the true costs of the line were deliberately hidden until it became too embarrassing to stop.
I've seen a lot of places that simply do not deserve the desolation that they're going to face. And for what? For a project that has only got this far because it has been lobbied for by a multi-billion-pound industry the people and the firms that want to make the money out of building it. Well, it's just a get-rich scheme with an associated land grab.
HS2 deny that, claiming 2,000 companies and 30,000 workers will prosper from the project.
That is a new building where the developer said, I've got planning permission to build this, will you give me the money for you know, what it would be worth? And they said, no, you've got to build it. So he built it.
The developer told us that 5 years ago he did offer the vacant land to HS2 for £1.5 million. But Parliament hadn't authorised purchase. So the developer built the block and has now sold it to HS2 for £6 million to be demolished.
And now it's coming down. It's insanity.
It costs the taxpayer a lot of money.
Oh, of course it costs the taxpayer a lot of money, but who cares? That's the thing. Who cares how much it costs? That's what the entire ethos of HS2 is all about.
Historically, railways brought Britain together, bringing trade and prosperity. Many regions hope for the same from HS2. Almost 190 years ago, Stephenson's rocket launched the world's first passenger railway from Liverpool to Manchester. These days in the north, many people are wondering, where did it all go wrong? Overcrowded, delayed and old. The region's failing railways are the talk here at the annual Convention of the North. And there's a fear that scrapping HS2 will kill off the 500,000 jobs and 90,000 homes they believe it will create.
We're going to become the laughingstock of the world if we're not careful here, where we're kind of setting out on these things and then can't finish them. We can't carry on with overcrowded infrastructure, both rail and road. We need to build this new line.
But a surprise guest speaker didn't seem to think that getting to London faster was the priority.
Coming from London on the train, it took me just over an hour and a half to get to Doncaster. But if, for example, you travelled from Liverpool to Rotherham, less than half the distance, you might have had to leave an hour earlier than me and change as many as 3 times.
Some fear this was a clue that the Prime Minister wants to axe HS2 and fast-track rail upgrades within the north.
The thing I'm going to resist from the government is this thing of either or. Oh, well, you can't have HS2, but we'll give you this, this and this over here. That, in my view, is not good enough, you know. We need north-south and east-west links across the north of England if we're to be truly set up for the future. And let's be absolutely clear what a northern powerhouse means practically. It means the north of England being at the front of the queue for all infrastructure investment for the next 30 years in the same way that London has been at the front of the queue for the last 50 years. That is actually what it means.
Andy Burnham doesn't know what he's talking about. Not just that. He ought to be pleading for this money for Manchester. Manchester needs the money. The only purpose of this train to Manchester is to get Manchester young talent up to London. And that's the last thing Manchester needs just now. The evidence is very clear. It's a much researched topic. High-speed transport links benefit the wealthier end of the line. Any line from Paris to Lyon or Lille, wherever it is, benefits Paris. This is another coup for London.
With a decision on HS2 expected soon, I'm at the National Railway Museum, wondering if history teaches us anything.
Robert Stephenson himself was attacked by irate local landowners or their farmers. And on one occasion, one of their company of the surveyors was actually run through with a pitchfork.
A century later, Britain still ruled the Iron Road.
The world speed record-breaking Mallard, number 60022.
Well, when Mallard created that record, 126 miles per hour in 1938, that's 1 mile per hour more than the fastest speed that's allowed on services on the same route today.
So, when did we lose our nerve?
The whole APT project, all £40 million worth of it, was a public disaster from the word go.
Around the world, they laid straight new lines for high-speed trains. Britain instead designed a 150-mile-an-hour train to tilt around a winding old Victorian track.
In fact, it only made passengers feel sick.
And suddenly this great, exciting project becomes very, very toxic, and the name APT becomes quite literally a laughingstock.
This is the National Rail Museum's Great Hall of Fame. But on recent performance, perhaps there should be a Great Hall of Shame. London's Crossrail is 2 years late and over budget. Electrification of the Great Western is late and triple the original cost. Yet both entire projects cost less than just the overspend on HS2.
There is not a major infrastructure project in the country that is not running significantly over budget. We are not good as a country at delivering big infrastructure projects. But do you know what the answer to that is? It's to get better.
On this site in Derby, they're proud to have been making trains for 180 years. Bombardier nervously awaits the HS2 review. They have a joint bid with Hitachi to make HS2's Great British a 250-mile-an-hour train.
No one's built a high-speed train in this country before at this speed, and so it's a whole new set of technologies that we all need to learn. And other countries have some of those skills already. We've seen them in other countries, France, Spain, Italy. We now want to develop those in the UK.
The whole factory knows HS2 could bring 5 years of work.
If we scrap HS2, I think it shows that we're not interested in the country's investment. A lot of the apprentices that work here, a lot of the dads and moms work here, the grandmothers and grandfathers worked here. You know, it's their time now.
I think Britain is sort of fell a little bit behind of other countries such as China and places like that. So I think it's important Britain do implement something like the high-speed train.
That's why the Cameron government poured £40 million into a brand new National College of High-Speed Rail.
So we've got 25,000 volts that comes down the contract.
Uncertainty over HS2 has affected recruitment. Hoping to attract more students, they're abandoning the college's high-speed rail name.
We are changing our name, yes. Whilst we're in this forever kind of roller coaster with no stability, we have a real issue about why would they kind of pin their hopes into the railway industry. They will go into another sector.
We are kind of behind in the world, and that we don't deliver that money. We don't have that kind of commitment or confidence to go at these big projects currently.
The review on whether or not to go ahead with HS2 is expected soon. One thing is for sure, it won't please everyone.
A project for which £7 billion has been spent. The whole thing is now in suspense.
Don't forget your promises to the North. This was about transforming the North.
Boris Johnson said he wanted to kill it. Boris Johnson has a terrible record for telling the truth. I pray this is one of the occasions when he does.
50 years' time, will you have the HS2 locomotive here?
Absolutely. And we've got the space.
If you'd like more information about tonight's programme, just head to our website at itv.com/tonight. Until next time, good evening and thanks for watching.
Coming up next week, environmental journalist Lucy Siegel finds out how plastic might be affecting her own health.
There are some levels that are above average of substances that are highly concerning. And I'm sort of half freaked out and half furious.
Still to come tonight, we're back on the wards with Paul as we meet more of Great Ormond Street's little heroes. It's the last in the series at 8:30. First, we're back to Emmerdale next.